Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We're thrilled you're here. I'm Jeff Gothelf.
And I'm Natalija Hellesoe.
And we're thrilled to be here. Natalia and I and Josh Seiden and Sonia Mevis have collaborated for a while now on, Natalia and Sonia wrote a book for Sense and Respond Press, which Josh and I run, called OKRs in the Center. And we've worked on a couple of different initiatives together since the book has come out. And this one's particularly near and dear to my heart because of my new book, Forever Employable, and really bringing together the world of objectives and key results and kind of combining it with the world of forever employability, career longevity, and professional development and growth. And so we're going to bring those two worlds together today. We're going to touch a little bit on the corporate world as well. And so just a couple of things to point out here. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, in the mural, there's a link to the mural in the chat. And so do feel free to put the mural link in there. If folks joined afterwards, we need the link again in there as well. Natalija, if you don't mind copying that in there again, because if they've joined after, they don't see it. And if you want to do a little bit of networking, as you can see in box number 1, in the mural itself, there's a who's here. If you copy and paste your LinkedIn profile URL, it creates a cool little card like that. And if you're interested in kind of seeing who's here, you can add your card. If we end up running out of space, you can just kind of add your card in and around the box. That's fine too. But we just wanted to give people an opportunity to network if they felt like doing so. And obviously there's no obligation to do that as well. The other thing I wanted to call your attention to in the mural is just the section up here at the top. I'm going to zoom in on it for just a second. So everything here is clickable. If you click on Natalia's picture, you'll go to her LinkedIn profile. If you click on mine, you will go to mine. Someone's making giant Post-it notes. If you click on the books, you'll go to the Amazon pages for each of those books. And then the other thing, just as a quick note, is upcoming events. Both Natalija and I have got some more upcoming events. 2 more Sense and Respond webinars coming up soon. One coming up next week for hiring product managers with Kate Leto. And then one coming up 2 weeks after that with Alla Weinberg about building a culture of safety. A fantastic topic as well. Natalija, you want to talk about the 2 events you've got coming up?
Yeah, sure. I run a monthly meetup in German and one in English around all topics concerning OKRs and related issues. And next week is the first episode, so to speak, this year. And we're talking about how to combine OKRs and strategy. And I will also do a couple events, and here's one posted as part of the Agile Reflect Festival.
Fantastic. And there's one other thing I wanted to point out before we jump into it is that in the box number 6 down here in the bottom right, it says lessons learned and Q&A. If any questions come up for you during our presentation, which is starting in just a second, you can just add a Post-it down here. Just double click on the mural and just put your question in here. And we'll, when we get to the end here, we'll use this area to source for questions and discussion as we move forward. So that's in box number 6 down at the bottom. And so we're going to jump right into it. Nice to see all you folks here. Very cool to see who's here. And so feel free to connect with anybody that's here. And Natalija, kick it off to you to jump in here.
Absolutely. Thanks. So you're all here to talk about how to use OKRs for your personal career development. And that might not be the first thought that comes to mind when we say OKRs, because most of you probably know OKRs as a business tool, a business concept, something that has become really popular in organizations these days to formulate goals, to define goals, and work together to achieve these goals in the teams and in the organization as a whole. But OKRs and many concepts like that are also tools that can add tremendous value when we use it maybe outside of the context they were once designed for. And so that's kind of the focus that we want to put it today. How to use business tools and to apply them in a different context and to actually bring value to shape your future for the better. And I guess there was never a better point in time than discussing how to shape your future for the better than it is in the beginning of 2021. I don't know about you, but I guess many folks have thought about, okay, 2020 was maybe so or so, huge expectations maybe didn't get met. And what's the plan now for 2021? And how can we actually execute that plan? How can we actually reach our goals? And so what we want to look into is how can we maybe use OKRs or the principles behind OKRs to then also bring our personal development to the next level and maybe reach some of the goals that we anticipate for 2021 with that. So what we want to look at is not just to apply the tools, but to really take a pragmatic approach. And that's the first thing that I really want to point out. It's not about taking business tools and then just applying them one by one in all the great details and, you know, have check-in meetings every week with yourself and do a lot of administration, but rather look at what is the essence of the tools that we have, what are the underlying principles, and to use that to create value for yourself. And as we already pointed out, today is really the focus on how to use a pragmatic approach to OKRs and how they can be a powerful way to set goals for yourself and take your development to the next level. Talking about OKRs, we don't know yet how much experience you already have, so where we can kind of, you know, kick off the conversation. So Jeff, if you want to launch a quick poll to find out who's here today and how much experience with OKRs you already have, that would be great. Then we know where to start.
The poll is live. We've got 2 questions in there.
So first question would be how you would describe what you do, so you know where you're coming from. And second question is how much experience do you already have with OKRs? And I see a lot of votes already coming in.
Interesting distribution as always.
It's always a good mix in these events. So we've got more than 80% covered. Guess let's give the last folks a second. Now we can have a look at the results.
91 out of 107 voted, almost 85%. It's pretty good, pretty good. better than any elections in the real world. So that's good. 85% participation rate.
That's good. Let's have a look at the results then.
All right, end the poll and let's share the results.
So who's here with us today? So we've got, 25% product management folks, a lot of people from design, some software engineering, some from management positions, a couple independent consultants, some HR folks here as well.
Good. Welcome.
1% marketers, welcome to you as well. And a couple who identify as other. And how about your OKR experience? So that's a pretty good equation here. So we've got a lot of people who are pretty new, maybe just preparing to start, but also 1/3 beginners. So you already know a little about OKRs, maybe doing your first implementation, but we also got some experts here. So feel free to also share your experience then in the Q&As when we get to that point. Nice. So thanks for the results, Jeff.
Yep.
And let's see, just for those who are totally new to the subject, let's do a super brief introduction to OKRs. So what are OKRs and why are they here, and how can we then leverage their value also for our development? So OKRs in an organizational context or in any other context, they really bridge the gap between what we see as long-term goals, so a vision that we have, maybe a strategy, long-term goals that we want to achieve, And on the other hand, the execution, so the things that we need to get done on a daily basis, the decisions that we need to take. And they bridge the gap between these two states to kind of give us an orientation and a direction. What is the next inspiring step towards these long-term goals? And they do that by describing that next inspiring step in an objective and by combining that with measurable key results that tell us whether we are on the right track towards achieving these long-term goals. And they look at the objective from different perspectives and measure a change in a relative or absolute value. But OKRs don't just look at, okay, these are our goals and these are our measurement criteria, but OKRs are also working in an iterative cycle. So once you have defined your OKRs, you regularly look at them in an OKR check-in, and then at the end of your OKR cycle, you also reflect on them, reflect on your results, reflect on the process, and then take the learnings into the new OKR cycle, and then define the next inspiring step towards your long-term goals based on what you know at that point of time and the results that you have achieved so far. And then, of course, goals don't live in a vacuum. So if you work in an organization, there are a lot of surrounding topics. Or of course, if you set goals for yourself, you have dependencies to other areas maybe of your life that you also have. So that's just a super brief introduction, but how can you now leverage or take these principles that OKR have as part of their concept for your personal development? Let's maybe look at a practical example. A couple of years ago, I was living in Hamburg. I was working for a big corporation there up north, and we were one of the sponsors of a huge sports event that was the Hamburg Triathlon. And for those of you who don't know that, the Hamburg Triathlon is actually part of the World Series. So you get to watch the pros, and then you have some competitions where everybody can participate. And since I moved there, one of my goals has always been to actually participate in this great event, because you've got like 300,000 people watching that all over the city. So it's a huge thing. So my long-term goal, so to speak, was to successfully finish the Hamburg Triathlon. But that was not something, that can be achieved just within a week or two. I mean, I'm a pretty fit person, but I was not at that level of fitness to just, sign myself up there and do it.
Yeah, no one just wakes up and runs a triathlon.
No, not really. And also you have to register like a year in advance. So that was really my goal for the year after, so to speak. And so if you now look at the principles of OKR, I asked myself, so if that is my long-term goal for next year, what is now the next important, inspiring step that I need to take in order to actually get closer to this goal? And from my perspective, it was something like this. So for the first 3 months, so to speak, I was looking at, first of all, I need to be in really good shape before the intense prep training starts. Because I signed up with a friend, and we kind of had the deal that for the last 3 months before the competition, we would really go on a training plan for 6 days a week. And at that point in time before, I was not in any shape or form to actually, get through that. So my first important step to get there was to be in good shape before we actually make it into that intense training area. And so for the key results, I got something like this. First, I needed to work on my running, because I did a lot of running, on occasions, but I wanted to get my 5K down in under 35 minutes to start with. I was really not in a good heart rate condition, so I wanted to work on that as well. And for a triathlon where you do running, swimming, and biking, like your core muscles are really important. So I picked one as a key results there as well, to work on my sit-ups. And then of course, swimming, that's the first thing that you're gonna do in a triathlon. So I wanted to be able to swim 1.5K without taking any breaks in the swimming pool. So these were kind of the measurement criteria I looked at to get closer to my goal of being in good shape before the training starts. But these are the objectives and key results. Then, of course, I had to look at the execution. So swimming once a week, every Wednesday with my colleague, or looking for a running partner, or signing up for the competition and things like that. These are then the activities in the execution, things that I just need to get done in order to be able to get closer to my goals. So this just as an example on how can you maybe combine OKRs with your personal development if you've got something like a fitness or a training goal. But one other thing is also important is how you look at the things that you're doing or the goals you want to achieve, and what that has to do maybe with a product perspective.
Yep.
Over to you, Jeff.
Excellent. Good. So thanks. This is really nice intro to OKRs, and starts to give you a sense of how this stuff happens outside of work. But let's take a look at it kind of from a product perspective. My background being in design and product, I do have a belief that everything, as we started thinking about applying OKRs for professional growth and career development as well as personal growth, as you think about the work that you do, in my opinion, everything that you do has, I'll say it, everything is a product or a service, or it has the qualities of a product or service, right? So if we just kind of say, everything you do is a product or a service. Now, if you think about it from a product perspective that way, right? Well, what do products actually have? Well, products, typically speaking, they're going to have users, right? So products have users. And if we're coming at this from the perspective, so by the way, just users or customers, right? Somebody consumes the thing that you do or the thing that you make, particularly at work. And if we're looking at this from an output versus outcome perspective, right? So for just to be super clear about the differences that we're talking about, right? An output is the thing you make or do, right? And then an outcome is the behavior change we see once customers use the output, right? So once we actually put the output into the hands of our users or our customers, we expect them to do something with it, and we expect their behavior to change in accordance with that. So if everything you do is a product, right, and products have users or customers, then our goal ultimately is to change the behavior of our customers or our users. That's ultimately our goal as a team, right? So for example, let me give you an example of that. You can think about this in a variety of different contexts, right? So again, let's look at this. One example. So let's say you work as a lawyer, right? So if you work as a lawyer, right, then what you do is you provide legal service, right, to the, for example, let's say you work for an organization, you provide legal service to the organization that you work for, right? So the product or service that you serve is that you provide is legal service, right? Who would be the users or the consumers of that product? Well, you could argue that the partners of the organization are the consumers of that. You could argue that the vendors to that organization. You could argue that the end customers of the organization are also the consumers of the legal service that you provide. And so then what would be the goal? What is the outcome, the behavior change that we're looking for in order to provide, to determine that we've actually delivered value, right? Because the thinking is, if you just deliver the service, well, that's great. Well, how do we know the service had actually any value, right? Just because we ship the thing doesn't mean that it actually made a difference to anybody. We want to see their behavior change, right? So in this particular case, you could say maybe we reduce the onboarding time for vendors by 50%. Right. So what we've done here is we've got, and just to use the language that we've been working on here, right? This is not this is your customer, right? We've talked about that, but this is your output, right? This is the thing that you make is legal service, right? And the outcome, the behavior change that you see here is, well, we're onboarding our vendors 50% more quickly, right? That's a goal for the company, and everything that we do is poised towards changing that user behavior, right? This ultimately is our goal. We want to change the behavior. How we get there, right? The legal service that we provide doesn't necessarily guarantee that we're going to reduce onboarding time for vendors by 50%. In fact, just a quick anecdote for you, and we can kind of create this again in a situation that's not technically a product world, but like if you take this again, I give you an example from a real world example for me. There was a client that I worked with, and there was a woman that I was engaging with there, and her job was to create a cybersecurity policy for the company, right? So that was her output. The thing that she made was cybersecurity policy. And this was how everybody had to keep the organization safe, not just the internal employees, but also the vendors. And in this particular case, right, her target audience or her customers were staff, vendors, partners, et cetera, right? Those are the people. And in this particular case, I fell into that group. I was the user of that particular thing, right? So I was the consumer, if you will, or the customer of that cybersecurity policy, and the goal, right? And this was actually the ultimate goal. The outcome that they were targeting was ultimately was to simplify the onboarding process, right? So that it's not just the onboarding time for vendors by 50%, but the actual cost of onboarding as well by 50%. Now, what's interesting about that is that the cybersecurity policy was complex, it was lengthy, and it was completely meaningless to 90% of the vendors that actually engaged with this organization. And so while the conversation that I was having with this woman was, she's like, look, I delivered the output, right? I made the thing, right? But it did not have the desired outcome, right? It didn't change this behavior, right? And so when it comes to objectives and key results, the key results that we're targeting need to be outcomes. That's the goal in all of this, right? And so as you start to think about your work, right, the thing that you do, you're a product manager, you're a designer, you're a marketer, think about it as a product or a service that you provide for others. And if you're looking to improve your career within an organization, for example, right, who consumes what you make? And if you do a great job with it, right, how does their behavior change, right? So if you're a designer and you create a prototype, right, how do you know that prototype had value, right? What is the behavior change you expect to see with product managers, with developers, and with stakeholders, et cetera? And you can start to think of your work in that sort of outputs and outcomes or objectives and key results way. Now, to really kind of bring this home a little bit, let's look through, like, be very, very specific about what a good OKR looks like and what makes up a good OKR. Natalija started to give you a bit of a sense of it. I just want to get very, very specific about what these things mean, right? So if we think about our objectives, right? An objective statement has the following qualities, right? So objective is, it's the goal or what we want to achieve, right? It's qualitative. Objectives are qualitative, right? So they're not necessarily, they're not a specific, like our goal isn't to launch the e-commerce site. It's to become the #1 e-commerce destination in Europe, right? That type of thing. They're qualitative. They are aspirational. They are inspirational. And very, very importantly, they are time bound. They need to have a deadline. We want to be clear to say that this is like, we want to achieve this by the end of Q2 or by the end of the year. So as you set your objectives, this is what you want to do, and you move forward. Now, as we think about key results, right, what are those going to be? Well, if key results, key results are, they answer the question, how do we know we achieved the objective, right? That's what they know. They are quantitative. They are provable, right? So there needs to be some sense that that the thing, you should be able to say, here's how I know this actually took place. And then most importantly, when it comes to, is that they have to be outcomes, right? They need to be measures of customer behavior. And in my opinion, this is what makes or breaks OKRs, because this is what encourages you or your teams to explore a variety of solutions in order to achieve the objective. If you made the objective, the key result an output, we go right back to basically standard waterfall planning, right? Our goal is to become the #1 e-commerce destination in Europe by the middle of the year, and the key result is to ship the e-commerce application. Well, then we're just back to waterfall planning. Are we the #1 site? Who knows? But we shipped the actual application. So just to give you kind of a sense of what a good example of this could look like, and we'll build off that one, right? So our goal, our objective could be is, become the top e-commerce destination in Europe by, Q3 2021, right? If we think about what could be good key results, good measures for that, good key results for that could be 50% of all e-commerce sales go through our site, something like that. Average, what is it? Average purchase order, average order size increases 25%, something like that, and then maybe it's like, number of return, visitors each month, right, doubles, something along those lines, right? Now, what the fundamental difference here is that this is qualitative, right? So let's check this, right? So it's the goal that we want to achieve. It's qualitative, right? The top e-commerce site is a qualitative aspect. It's aspirational. We aspire to become this. It's inspirational. I hope that's our goal as an organization. And it's time bound. We've got a very quick sense of where to go. And then let's just kind of check these against our criteria. Quantitative, provable, and measures of customer behavior, right? So 50% of all e-commerce sales go through our site. It's quantitative, it's provable, we can measure it, and it's a customer behavior. Average order size increases 25%, checks all 3 boxes. Number of return visitors each month doubles, checks all 3 boxes there as well. And so that's really important. Now, just to bring this in, you can actually take this exact same approach as Natalija showed you with the triathlon example, and you can apply this to your career and your professional development as well. So we can once again think about, well, okay, great. What would be a good, if we're looking at this from a career perspective and I provide a service, so you could say, for example, as a career, my objective is to become more prominent in the product management community, right, by the end of 2021. Right, that's an objective. If you're looking to kind of build from a forever employable aspect, you're looking to build a reputation for yourself, some thought leadership, a network and an audience that's reading your content. This could be an objective for you. And again, if you look at it from this element over here, we tick all the boxes, right? It's a goal we want to achieve. It's qualitative. It's aspirational. I hope it's inspirational for you. It's your objective. And then it's time bound. It's by the end of the year. And then if we want to, if we want to kind of set some key results for that, right? What would be some measures that we could say that tell us that we're starting to achieve that particular objective? And that's a measure of customer behavior. We could say, well, look, I want to increase by 50% the number of Twitter followers I have, right? Something like, I want to get at least 5 speaking invitations this year, right? And then maybe it's every blog post I write has an average of 1,000 views, something along those lines. And again, right, these are quantitative, they're provable, and they're measures of customer of behavior. In this case, the customers are the product management community. And if they're consuming what you do, right, the execution is the tough part, right? As Natalija showed you, what do you do to actually get there? But what we've done here is we've written an OKR for your professional development as well. So we've got one for the corporate, one for your professional development, and you can apply this to grow your career. And this is outside of the corporate environment. You can also do this inside your corporate environment. Natalija, tell them how.
Yeah, absolutely. So what many companies think about when they implement OKRs, and something that I also often discuss with my clients is, okay, how about individual OKRs then in the organization? And so what that would typically look like is, okay, you think about your OKR cascade or your OKR tree and think about, okay, we've got OKRs on company level, on team level, and now we would also need OKRs on individual level to kind of set goals for the individual people. The challenge with that, though, is if you set OKRs on an individual level, it really adds to the complexity, especially for the alignment part. Those of you who might have already experience with OKRs know what I'm talking about. If you've got like individual OKRs for maybe then 3,000 people in your organization that still fit into your all over OKR tree, it's a tremendous amount of administration and communication necessary to actually align them. And it does not necessarily really add any value. The other thing that's really challenging about that approach is that it's really tempting to then tie performance management to your OKRs. And as you've probably already discussed when you talk about OKR is kind of tying performance management to OKRs really kind of goes against the underlying principles of setting ambitious goals and learning from the outcomes of your OKRs and then readjusting and reiterating. Of course, it might also add a lot of extra work when we think about extra OKR cycles and everything that goes with that. And something to also think about is this really opens the doors for micromanaging people as part of their OKR sets. And when you work in an organization where one of the reasons why you wanted to implement and work with OKRs is to really improve your team collaboration and that people work together on a shared vision and shared goals, then setting individual OKR might actually totally work against that endeavor, because then people might focus on their individual OKRs that might not be super aligned with the team or company OKRs, and then you kind of got the same effect as you had before. So does that then actually mean that individual OKRs doesn't make any sense? I would say in parts, but not necessarily overall. So what I would like to argue is that individual OKRs can make sense if there is no need to widely align them. So if you find a part for your individual OKRs that is not really part of your overall OKR cascade or your overall OKR tree, if they're not tied to performance management, so if this is something where you really focus on your personal development, but it doesn't have any monetary consequences if you don't achieve these goals. And when you look for key results with metrics, you can actually own. So something that you can actually influence as an individual, rather than having a tremendous amount of dependencies where you then can always argue, well, I didn't reach my goal because X, Y, Z. So focusing on personal development for individual OKRs instead of project-based or part of team-based goals, I would say can make sense. So what can that look like? Maybe just to give you an example here. So if you aspire to be maybe a lead of a software dev team, yeah, so you've been part of the team for quite a while, but your aspiration would really be to lead that team. And you ask yourself the question, like I did before in my triathlon example, so what is now the next important step that I need to take? Maybe the next step is not to actually apply for the position because there are currently no openings, but maybe first I want to up my game a little when it comes to my leadership capabilities in theory and in practice. And that could be the desired goal. And then we would do the same as Jeff just showed us with his examples to look for what can be measurable key results that, as good as possible, describe a change in behavior. And that might not always be easy when we talk about personal development, where we don't have these direct users or customers where we already have metrics in place or in our minds. But things to consider could maybe be perspectives like feedback. If you want to receive feedbacks from your potentials or development areas, maybe from your team members for leadership responsibility that you took on so far. Or you look into the perspective of acceptance. So if you would volunteer for leadership roles in projects, maybe even lateral leadership roles, can you successfully volunteer? So would people actually accept that you take over a certain leadership responsibility? So that would at least be close to a change in their behavior or a show of their behavior. Something else could be, are you the go-to person? So to kind of look into, okay, do colleagues actually ask me for advice beyond detailed product or software issues? So am I a go-to person when it comes to the bigger picture or actually helping or coaching people? And maybe something when we talk about theory and practice to look into, okay, how can I improve my knowledge about that? And how can I apply that? So to, for example, learn about and experiment with 3 new methods. Is that, like we talked about before, like 100% measurement of change of behavior? No, it's not. It's something in between. It's kind of a journey to that point. And that's something that is often quite common when you look at personal development objectives. You might not be able to kind of formulate perfect key results as a change of behavior. What I want to point out, though, is it might be worth thinking in that direction and then at least come up with a couple ideas that cover a change in behavior as best as you can, instead of just listing something that I put here on the right, like single activities you do as key results. So like, for example, attending leadership meetups or scheduling feedback lunch stage, that shouldn't be part of your key result because that's just something that you need to get done. So move away from just activities or initiatives as far as possible and try to apply the principles that we just mentioned as good as possible to your personal development OKRs as well.
One thing, Natalija and I debated this point a lot because, you know, and she's managing to win me over a little bit, but I published this article in HBR last month, and it basically said, a lot of what Natalija said is that, look, OKRs for individuals inside an organization tied to performance management reviews don't work. And to me, it's a team level goal setting activity when you're working inside an organization. But for your own personal development, clearly there are ways to make this work, and a way for you to measure this in ways that that give you a sense that you're actually trending and headed in the right direction. And if you click on that, you can actually check out that article. let's talk about a few lessons learned as we kind of do our work, Natalia, and see if we can answer some of the questions. If you've got any more questions, box 6 here in the bottom would be really helpful, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can in the 15 minutes or so we have left. Lessons learned, Natalia.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to point out one thing that I often see when putting OKRs into practice. It's great when you set your goals, you define your measurement criteria, and you have everything in place. But as we mentioned before, goal setting is nothing without goal execution. And I just want to share one example of what you can maybe use in terms of a tool to make the execution a little easier. And I don't know if some of you have maybe already heard about the tiny habits approach. And one of the things that is described in this really recommendable book is, what can I do instead? What really small things or really tiny habit can I form in my daily routines that is something that gets me closer to my goal and that I can do on a regular basis? And you can use the format that is laid out here. So think about when something happens. So you need something to trigger this behavior to make it easier for you to get into that. And think about what you would normally do. And then what you would like to do instead to get closer to your goal. So for example, normally when a team member would come with an issue and you're totally busy preparing for something, rather than just brushing him or her off because you're really busy, in the future, I will quickly schedule a one-on-one check-in. So just some kind of a different tiny behavior that you can incorporate in your daily routines. Will that always work from day one? Probably not. So the focus that you want to set here with tiny habits is to find something super small. So something where you don't really need to think about it, something that doesn't have like an extra hurdle built into it, but something that kind of can come naturally after the trigger. So going back to our example with the leadership, it could, for example, be, so when I learn something new about leadership, then rather than just taking general notes that I never look at again, like in a webinar like this, I will actually formulate one concrete experiment I want to do this week, instead of just taking notes all over my notepad or iPad. So think of something really small that you can do that would actually, over time, if they add up, have a tremendous impact on your goal. Or going back to the triathlon example, a tiny habit could be, when I close my work day, I always put on my running shoes. And even if I just go for a walk in them, that's something that I want to train myself to do to get closer to the goal of, for example, go running 3 times a week to then one day be able to also finish a triathlon. But that's just one tip from the learnings that we have in practice. Really think about how to execute what you set in your OKRs.
Yeah, and for me, like the question I get asked all the time is, well, does this work for everything? Can you apply OKRs not just in business but for your personal life, for everything? And I try to, but the reality is that I found some situations where it doesn't really work. So, for example, I'll give you an example of kind of, again, from my world. So, if my one of my objectives is to become a better piano player. Now, I play piano at home for myself and for my family, and that's pretty much it, right? That's my objective. And there's lots of output that I could generate. So if we think about things that I could potentially do to kind of execute this, right? There's lots of things that I could do, like I can take piano lessons, for example. I could practice. That would be really helpful to potentially making it better. I could even do some performances, right? I could perform in certain places, but the outcome itself, right? Like the measure of behavior, that did I become a better piano player, right? That one's really tough. Like to say, for me to say, like, am I measurably better? And frankly, for something like that, it's tough for me to come up with a behavior. Just because I practice every day, just because I take a lesson every week, just because I play a gig every month, right? Those are outputs. Those are things that I do, am I getting better? I'd like to think so, but I don't know how to measurably tell that. So there are situations that I've come into where at least I struggle to measure that. Now you might be able to come up with some things there, but for me, that's been tough. So that's one of the lessons learned for me, is that, if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. In that case, we want to try to measure those types of behaviors. So, so Nathan asks, hey, would being able to play a song that you can't currently play work as an outcome? Yeah, for me personally, I suppose, yeah, is kind of getting through those pieces. But it's kind of like, like performing a piece. It's kind of like optimizing the load time for your homepage, right? You could optimize it forever. Like when is it good enough? Like when am I done playing this thing? But I hear you. We can definitely think about ways to do that as well. If you've got any more questions, please do feel free to put them down here. We do have about 10 minutes left, and I'd love to get through as many of these questions from you folks as possible now in the kind of time that we have left. The one that I want to start with, Natalija, is this one. I'm going to turn it orange just to give us a better sense that that's the one we're working on. I'm going to read it to you. And then I have an answer. I'm curious what yours is. So how do you choose measurable outcomes for something new and you don't know what a meaningful measurement would be?
That's a really good question.
It is a good question.
I guess first thing that comes to mind is I hardly ever come across something in an organization that is like totally new, meaning that no one has ever done anything alike. You have nothing to compare it to. You don't have anything to even think about. Maybe it's a new product or a new initiative or something that has not existed before. But I think normally it's you're able to find something that can at least relate to. And coming from kind of the definition that Jeff shared before, thinking about, okay, who are the users or the customers? So who is this actually related to? And think about, okay, what is their interaction with whatever you're doing here? So kind of trying to find some kind of behavior that is related to the outcome that you want to achieve. And it normally brings you to the discussion, okay, what could I then measure in terms of a change of that behavior? At the same time, something might be totally new, and that would also be something where you would need to experiment maybe a little bit if there is anything really measurable out there. But I would say, at least from my experience, normally find something relatable once you look at your users and their behavior related to whatever it is you want to achieve there. What is yours, Jeff?
So look, I'm going to give you the answer is, look, you take a guess. I think that's, to me, that's, and it sounds ridiculous, but it's the truth, right? Look, everything we do at work, everything we decide to work on, every goal that we set is an assumption. It's our best guess about what we think we should be doing right now and how we think we should be doing it. Assumptions are guesses. Sometimes they are less risky because we have more evidence that the guess is pretty much right. And in some situations, we have less evidence to that effect. I think if you're setting out for something new, and you don't know what a meaningful measurement would be, and so let's talk about this from sort of a personal perspective, and then we can talk about it from kind of a corporate perspective as well. On a personal scale, just set a goal that take a guess about what would make you feel accomplished. Right. So for example, if the triathlon goal is I want to run it under a certain time frame, right? That would make you feel accomplished. Is it good? Is it bad? It doesn't matter. It makes you feel accomplished. Now, if you go run a triathlon and you crush that goal, like you come in way, way, way below it, well, then you guessed wrong. So the next time you can guess a little bit higher. And so I think in a situation like that, you make a guess about what you feel like would be a good outcome in this particular case, or a key result. In a professional capacity, in professional corporate capacity, really more specifically, if you're writing OKRs, really thinking through what would be meaningful for the business, right? And like Natalija said, you've got enough evidence and you've got enough data inside the organization to where you've got a sense of at least what would be meaningful. And usually that is heavily dependent on the size of your organization, right? So if you're Facebook, for example, you've got 2 billion users, then a 0.001% shift in some kind of a metric is significant. That's a lot of people, right? If you are a B2B service and you have 500 customers, 200 customers, then a 0.001% shift in a metric is likely not to be significant enough. But my ultimate answer I come back to is take a guess about what you feel would be meaningful, remembering that we're time boxing these OKRs, personal or professional, we're time boxing them. And so when you get to that deadline, if you crushed your OKR, you guessed too low. If you're nowhere near it, you guess too high. And so you can set it again a bit more accurately. So there's a trial and error here that benefits from the time box. And so that's the advice that I give teams that I work with as well.
I think that neatly ties into the question kind of next to it when we talk about the triathlon example as well. So the question here was, so how do you then deal with the reality, kind of optimistic planning versus then in my example, rainy, cold weather, or all the very tasty cakes, or all these kind of obstacles that we might hit, on the way to achieving our goal. And I think that's one of the advantages I see when using OKR compared to traditional goal setting is exactly that. First of all, we don't plan for a huge amount of time. We don't plan until the race and set goals for that kind of time, but we just plan for the next inspiring, important step. And then, of course, it is, like Jeff just mentioned, it is our hypothesis, our guess, what will I be able to achieve within, for example, the next 3 months? And then if the winter is maybe tougher than I thought, and I cannot really get my ass up to go running when it's -5 degrees outside, well, then I will probably see it in the results of my key results. And then I can just take it from there and say, okay, I was not able to run the 5K in under 35 minutes. I still used 37. So what is then the next important step? Maybe in the next 3 months, I need to focus on running even more. So that has more priority. Same goes with the cakes, especially over Christmas, really big obstacle when it comes to training. But these are the things that we might then consider for the upcoming OKR cycle. So I would say to find the mix of optimistic, ambitious, aspirational planning, but also kind of maybe take your experience and the reality into the planning as well to kind of, balance that out might be a good guess. But then just find out after the OKR cycle, okay, what happened? Where do I stand? And what do I need to do next? That's exactly what we want to achieve with this iterative cycle with the short time frame to then be able to adjust the reality that happened into our next planning step.
Yep.
Anything you want to add?
No, I think that's good. I want to get through at least one more question. There's a few here, and if you don't get your question answered, feel free to message us or to email us. I'm going to put my email in the chat as well, or LinkedIn or whatever, and I'm sure Natalija can do the same. The one that I want to take on this one from Evilo, who I've gotten to know recently, because I think this is a good one, and it applies in all of the contexts that we have been discussing. And so Evilo asked, do you use hypotheses and experiments together with OKRs? I'm going to jump in first on this, if you don't mind, because it's a relatively short answer from mine. And the answer is yes. And you kind of have to, because if you look at the examples that we've shared, right, in most of these examples, right, like for example, if we go back over here, right, there's nothing in here that tells you what to do or how to do it, right? There's nothing in the key results. There's no output here. You have to go discover the best way to achieve that key result. And so, in my opinion, what you absolutely have to then hypothesize. Well, my hypothesis is that if I write blog posts about OKRs, I will get more readers and more views, right? And my experiment is to write very short blog posts or tweets about OKRs, and then see if those attract people. And then I'll spend more time on the next one. Maybe I'll write 500 words or 1,000 words on the next one and scale that out. So absolutely yes to this question. You have to, because a good OKR doesn't tell you what to do. And so you've got to test and learn, discover your way to the best way to achieve that objective and key result. What do you think?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And speaking of the hypothesis, I can maybe add to a question what was down here as well, talking about the best short-term wins. I think that's, for me at least, part of the short-term wins, that you really need to think about what is my hypothesis of what my outputs will actually translate into which outcomes. So when we talk about OKRs in an organization, okay, it shifts the discussion from the things that we need to do to the things that we can actually measurably achieve, that we can see in the change of customer behavior, for example. But I would say the same is true for your personal development. It forces you to think about, instead of just listing your things on your to-do list, to think about, okay, what can I actually measure afterwards I did something, to really be sure that something has changed. And the other thing, just to add on that from an organizational point of view, most of the feedback I get from my clients within the first cycles is, okay, maybe we didn't go into the OKRs that far, it's not all working great, but what we definitely achieved is improved communication, improved alignments, and we found a lot of issues that we need to tackle because OKRs brought it to the surface. And I think that's something that OKRs really do a great job at when it comes to personal or organizational development, that you stumble upon all the things that you should maybe take a look at to really improve your personal development or your organization for the better.
Excellent.
Anything to add?
No, that's great. And look, we are at time. So folks, first of all, thank you so much for joining us and spending an hour with us. We truly appreciate it. If you didn't get your questions answered, our emails are in the chat. We're on LinkedIn. We are available to see you as well, to answer those questions there as well. If the mural will stay up for a while, so you've got access to this conversation. And then once the video becomes available, we will definitely be publicizing that. We'll drop you an email and let you know that that's happening. Just a quick reminder that up here at the top, you've got links to the books as well as our upcoming events. Feel free to click through. We'd love to see you at any and all of those. And so with that, Natalija, thank you very much. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Folks, thanks so much for being here. And we will see you all next time very soon. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.